I'm Michelle Mendoza, thrilled to be with Christopher Kelly. He's a historian and he's an author who makes history worth the read again. We find that there are stories within our own family history that start to make a little bit more sense. I found that as I read through your latest book, An Adventure in 1914. Why did you write this book?
An Adventure in 1914 is by far my most personal book. What I did is I took a memoir that was written by Thomas Tileston Wells, my great-grandfather. He traveled with his family in Europe in the summer of 1914 at the time that World War I broke out.
After writing America Invades, Italy Invades, you had presented history and the influence of these nations on the world. But when you come right down to a personal story of one man during a tumultuous time, that history suddenly becomes very personal, not just to you who wrote it, but to the reader as well. Let's talk about who Thomas Tileston Wells was.
Wells was a New York lawyer. He was born in New York in 1865. He died in New York City in 1946. He died 13 years before I was born, so I never had a chance to meet him personally. For me, I had his document, and I also interviewed family members who still remembered him, notably my mother and my aunt. And I also did more research to try to find out more about who he was.
But there have been so many changes in the world that have taken place since that time. That era in history of 1914, on the brink of war, we start out this story, which reads like a novel, of a man who was experiencing the beauty of Europe with his family when things started to take a change.
That's right. He was traveling by train through Europe. He started out in Paris, went through Switzerland, through the Austrian Tyrol, and then ended up in what is today northern Italy. And it was at Riva where things really kind of came to a head. Just days before, Austria had declared war on Serbia, launching the start of World War I. As a result of that, there were Austrian troops that were mobilizing in that part of the world, and Wells heard the sounds of bugles, soldiers marching, and also saw men saying goodbye to their sweethearts, to their wives, to their mothers at the cathedral in Trent. And so he witnessed all of these things. In a sense, he was a witness to what I called the greatest train wreck in history, the start of World War I.
Yeah, you make that profound statement, World War I, the original sin of the 20th century.
That's right. World War I cost over 17 million lives, and it also led directly to the creation of fascism and communism, which turned out to be scourges of the 20th century. It also toppled 4 empires. The Russians had their revolution. The German Kaiser went into exile. Austria-Hungary was broken up. And the Ottoman Empire was dismembered, creating nations such as Iraq and Syria.
When we get insight into a person's life in that time, it really starts to come into play, make sense. You still have to live and eat and breathe and provide for your family throughout the most tumultuous times in history. And that's one of the fascinating aspects of the realism of An Adventure in 1914. But unlike a novel, there's some things, you can't make this stuff up. You say that Wells likely had an affair with the Queen of Romania.
That's right. I do suggest there is a possibility. I don't know that it happened for sure, but according to my sources, which really is my family, there was the likelihood of a relationship between my great-grandfather and Queen Marie of Romania.
How do you know that? What leads you to believe that?
She was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. She had married King Ferdinand of Romania. She was really English, but she became the Queen of Romania. My source for that actually goes back to my aunt, which in turn goes back to my grandmother, who obviously knew her father and also met Queen Marie many times. My grandfather helped Queen Marie to visit the United States of America on a tour in 1926. She visited, for instance, Niagara Falls and even Goldendale, Washington, as well, where she helped to found the Mary Hill Museum.
Christopher Kelly is our guest. He takes us on an adventure in his new book, An Adventure in 1914. In the midst of this war, Thomas Wells, his life changed as well.
Right. I would say that his life fundamentally changed as a result of the adventure that he experienced. He became the chairman of Serbian Relief, which brought food and agricultural equipment to Serbia and helped other Balkan countries. Through that, he ended up meeting Queen Marie of Romania, with whom he may have had an affair. And so, yes, his life was definitely changed by his adventure.
There was more to the adventure. There was some peril involved as well.
That's right. In Riva, Wells was actually arrested and detained. He was accused by Austrian authorities of being a Russian spy. They said that they had caught the other 2 Russian spies and that they would execute him that day. He had to talk his way out of that, and readers can find out how.
He also had other accusations leveled against him that were pretty fascinating.
Yes, Wells was the Romanian consul general to the United States from 1918 until 1941. Queen Marie of Romania ended up dying in 1938. There is an official report on Wells' performance as a Romanian diplomat that accuses him of defending Jewish interests over those interests of his employer, the Romanian government. This is an intriguing phrase, and I'm not sure entirely what it means, but it could be that Wells helped with visas for Romanian Jews who were trying to flee the Holocaust, which was really just about to begin at that time.
Something to think about then as you read this book, how one single person may have had an impact on the rest of history. That's one of the reasons why An Adventure in 1914 is an adventure that each one of us should take.
An Adventure in 1914 is a very personal book. For me, it was a journey of discovery. I didn't know all that much about my great-grandfather before I started researching and writing the book, and much of what I had thought that I knew about him turned out to be wrong. But in the course of researching it and the course of retracing the steps of the journey that he took in 1914 and seeing what he saw at that time and photographing it to share with the world, I gained a greater appreciation for him, for his life, and for the fact that his life actually saved the lives of many other people, particularly with his relief work for Serbia.
If you'd like to take an adventure, I might recommend An Adventure in 1914. More than a memoir, more than fascinating pictures, it brings history to life. It was a book written by a man who experienced this adventure firsthand, Thomas Tileston Wells, edited by our guest, Christopher Kelly. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Michelle.